It was a sunny afternoon in a quiet, small-town diner, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and life usually moves slowly. The bell above the door jingled as a few regulars sipped their coffee, chatting quietly. Among them sat an elderly black woman, her hands wrapped around a warm mug, lost in her own thoughts. She had come here for her usual afternoon ritual, a little peace and comfort in a world that often treated her unfairly. That peace didn't last long. The diner door swung open with a force that made the windows rattle. In walked the local sheriff, swagger in his step, and a smirk plastered across his face. His eyes scanned the room, settling on the woman. There was something in the way he looked at her, a mixture of arrogance and prejudice that made the air feel heavier. He muttered under his breath, words laced with contempt. Then, without warning, he stepped closer and slapped her across the face. The sound echoed through the diner like a gunshot. Chairs scraped as people gasped. Coffee mugs rattled on tables. Some of the diners instinctively stood, unsure if they should intervene. Others froze shocked, their eyes wide as they watched this act of cruelty. The woman put her hand to her cheek, tears welling in her eyes. But she didn't cry out. She stared at the floor, holding herself with dignity, even as the sheriff mocked her silently. The tension in the room was suffocating, and for a moment, it felt like the world itself had stopped. Unbeknownst to the sheriff, Steven Seagal, her son was not far away, calm, focused, and observing every detail. He was about to enter the story. Trained as a Navy SEAL, Steven wasn't just an ordinary man. He was a force to be reckoned with, a presence that demanded respect even without a word. The sheriff had no idea what was coming. As the sheriff continued to laugh, confident in his power, the audience can already sense the impending reckoning. This wasn't going to end the way he expected. Every glance, every whisper, every subtle movement was being watched. The camera focuses on Steven in the shadows, a silent storm approaching the diner. And just as the sheriff turned his back, smug and self-assured, a chilling thought lingers in the air. He had no idea justice was already on its way. The diner had fallen into an uneasy silence after the slap. People dared not breathe too loudly. The sheriff, Brody Taggart, leaned against the counter smirking, convinced that fear was his ally. The elderly woman, Mrs. Robinson, touched her cheek, the sting of pain spreading. But her eyes burned with something far more powerful than fear, quiet determination. Outside, the sun cast long shadows across the empty streets of Oak Haven. Nobody suspected that Steven Seagal was already watching. He stood a few blocks away, leaning against a parked car, observing everything. Calm, composed, his presence was like a silent storm. He had seen violence before, faced enemies far deadlier than a small-town bully, but this was personal. The sight of his mother hurt, humiliated, lit a fire in him that no training could cool. The sheriff waved to the few patrons still frozen in their booths. "Move along." He barked, voice low and dangerous. Everyone shuffled nervously, avoiding eye contact. He thought the scene was under his control. He didn't see the figure at the window across the street, the silent shadow whose eyes were locked onto him. Mrs. Robinson finally stood, adjusting her hat, steadying herself. Her voice trembled but carried authority. "You have no right," she said, "to treat anyone like that. Not me, not anyone." The sheriff laughed loud and cruel, waving a dismissive hand. "Old lady, you should know your place," he sneered. It was then that Steven took his first step into action, not yet physical, but psychological. He pulled out his phone, fingers flying as he started sending encrypted messages. Friends, allies, anyone who could watch, record, and report, all within reach. He wasn't there to start a fight yet. He was gathering evidence, controlling the narrative. Every move the sheriff made, every abusive word, was being documented. Back inside, Mrs. Robinson walked to the counter to get her purse. Jenny, the young waitress, hesitated. She wanted to speak but feared reprisal. Steven's calm, steady presence on the street gave her a strange sense of security. Even unseen, he made the sheriff feel vulnerable. A predator in his own right, but one who didn't strike blindly. Then came the brief moment of suspense. The sheriff's phone buzzed. He checked it, frowning. He didn't recognize the number. A text. "We saw everything. What you did will not be ignored." Taggart's hands tightened around his phone. Panic, just a flicker, crossed his face. He had underestimated the situation. This was the turning point. The audience begins to feel the tension, the silent countdown before the storm breaks. The sheriff didn't have an answer. He thought he was untouchable. Little did he know, the diner's normal rhythm, the sleepy town streets, the casual conversations, all were about to become the stage for a reckoning he could not escape. Steven Seagal remained in the shadows, a calm force with eyes that missed nothing. He watched the sheriff's every twitch, the slight smirk, the misplaced confidence. He noticed the angles of surveillance cameras, the way the doors opened, the people who might witness. Every detail mattered, and as the diner returned to its tense normalcy, the audience senses it too. Something is coming. A storm, silent at first, gathering power. Every sip of coffee, every footstep, every whispered word in Oak Haven is now part of a countdown. And viewers are left thinking, waiting, predicting. Who will strike first? And will justice be swift enough to protect the one who started it all? If you were in Steven Seagal's shoes, watching your loved one get humiliated, would you act immediately or wait and plan your move? The afternoon sun cast a harsh glare across the diner's windows, reflecting the tension inside. Steven Seagal remained in the shadows across the street, eyes never leaving the sheriff. He wasn't moving yet. Patience was key. Every movement inside the diner, every glance the sheriff threw, was being catalogued. Every patron, every small detail mattered. Inside, the sheriff, Brody Taggart, leaned back in his chair, trying to regain composure. He wiped his sweaty palms on his pants, unaware that the situation had already slipped from his control. The slap to Mrs. Robinson had started something far bigger than him. It wasn't just a mother defending herself anymore. It was Steven Seagal, a trained Navy SEAL with unmatched skills, now aware and ready. Mrs. Robinson sat quietly, pretending to sip her coffee, though her heart raced. She could feel it. Something was changing outside. The usual hum of the diner was replaced with a subtle tension, like the calm before a storm. Patrons exchanged nervous glances, their whispers barely audible. Jenny, the waitress, peeked toward the window, unsure if she should warn someone or stay frozen in fear. Steven shifted slightly, calculating the distance. He wasn't rushing in blindly. The sheriff might be armed. The diner crowded. Any misstep could hurt an innocent person. His training kicked in automatically. Every angle, every exit, every potential obstacle was assessed in seconds. This wasn't about revenge. It was about precision. Then the sheriff made his mistake. Laughing loudly, he waved at a patron, bragging about his authority, mocking the elderly woman again. "She's just an old lady," he sneered. "What can she do?" His voice carried over the diner, dripping with arrogance. That arrogance was his undoing. From across the street, Steven noticed the way Taggart's hand rested near his belt, too casual, too confident. Steven's eyes narrowed. He slowly moved from shadow to shadow, making his approach almost imperceptible. His steps were silent, calculated. He didn't need to rush. The sheriff was already making it easy for him. Inside the diner, tension rose further. Mrs. Robinson's fingers tightened around her cup, knuckles white. Patrons started to shift in their seats, sensing that something was off. The sheriff laughed again, oblivious to the predator across the street. He was too busy thinking he had control, too blind to see the silent storm approaching. And then came a subtle sign. The reflection of Steven's jacket in the window caught the sheriff's eye. His smirk faltered for a split second. Something in his instincts screamed danger, but he couldn't pinpoint it. The audience feels it too, the shift in energy, the suspense building like a taut wire ready to snap. Steven paused at the curb, assessing. Every distraction, every movement from the sheriff was analyzed. This wasn't a movie scene, it was real, and any wrong move could escalate unpredictably. But Steven's confidence was absolute. Every trained instinct, every hour of preparation, was coming into focus. The audience now senses a question in the air. How far would you go to protect a loved one? How far would Steven go to stop someone abusing power? It's the moment that makes viewers lean in, waiting for the inevitable collision. Inside, the sheriff tried to regain control, pacing slowly. All right, he muttered, pretending to calm himself. But the fear had begun to creep in. Something was off. He couldn't see the figure moving like a shadow across the street, but his gut told him trouble was near. "Jenny," the waitress whispered under her breath. "Something's happening, I just feel it." Patrons nodded, nervous energy filling the air, and Mrs. Robinson, ever calm, remained seated, knowing that justice might arrive in ways she hadn't imagined, silently, but decisively. Steven Seagal finally made his first deliberate move. Not a strike, not yet. A small shift, stepping into a more open view, letting the sheriff catch a glimpse. The sheriff's hand twitched. The tension snapped like a drawn bowstring. Everyone could sense the moment before action. The diner seemed to hold its breath. Steven's eyes locked on the sheriff. Calm, deadly, unwavering. Every person in that diner, including the audience watching the video, could feel it, the moment where power meets skill, arrogance meets consequence. The countdown to confrontation had begun, and just before anything happens, the scene freezes in suspense. Every heartbeat counts. Every small gesture matters. Viewers are left with a burning question in their minds. Will Steven Seagal act now, or will he wait for the perfect moment to make his move? It's a pause that holds attention, a cliffhanger that keeps the audience hooked. Desperate to see the next part, desperate to know how the sheriff's arrogance will finally meet its match. The diner's air seemed to thicken with tension. Patrons froze mid-sip, mid-bite, as if sensing the storm about to break. Outside, Steven Seagal's shadow stretched long under the late afternoon sun, each step deliberate, precise. He wasn't just walking, he was closing in with calculated patience. Every muscle, every instinct, tuned to anticipate the sheriff's next move. Inside, Sheriff Brody Tegot noticed movement in the reflection of the window. His confident smirk faltered for the first time. Something primal screamed at him, danger. But arrogance still held him back. Probably just a pedestrian, he muttered, brushing off the unease. Yet the hairs on his neck stood on end. Steven stepped into full view now, crossing the street slowly. His eyes locked on the sheriff, unwavering, calm yet deadly. The audience can feel it. This is no ordinary man confronting the sheriff. This is someone with unparalleled skill, someone who could dismantle any threat with precision. The tension inside the diner ratcheted higher. Mrs. Robinson's hand trembled slightly over her coffee cup. Not from fear, but anticipation. She knew the man outside, Steven Seagal, trained, formidable, someone whose presence alone demanded respect. Jenny, the waitress, clutched a towel in her hands, her knuckles white. Patrons shifted nervously, whispering among themselves, their eyes glued to the window. The sheriff, realizing he had an audience, tried to regain composure. He puffed out his chest, placing his hand near his belt. "I'm in charge here," he barked, forcing his voice louder than his nerves would allow. But the words fell flat, hollow against the silence outside. Steven continued to advance, slow, methodical, each step an unspoken warning. The moment the sheriff reached for his holster, Steven's hand shot out, lightning fast. Not to strike yet, but a subtle display of control, a reminder that he was in command. The audience feels the shock wave, one small gesture, yet it radiates authority. Every viewer leans in, heart pounding, waiting for the inevitable. Inside the diner, whispers turned into audible murmurs. "Is he a cop?" One patron asked nervously. "No, that's Steven Seagal," another muttered, disbelief mixing with awe. The sheriff's bravado faltered. His eyes widened as he realized he wasn't dealing with an ordinary man. This was someone who had faced real danger, someone trained for moments exactly like this. Steven closed the distance in mere seconds, stepping into the diner doorway. The sheriff stumbled back, momentarily frozen. The tension in the room was tangible, almost suffocating. Every patron felt it, fear, respect, and anticipation all mingling together. "Enough," Steven said calmly, voice low but commanding. The sheriff swallowed hard, suddenly aware that his actions had consequences far beyond his authority. The slap, the mocking, the abuse of power, all of it had led to this moment. Now the sheriff faced someone who would not tolerate injustice. A patron, unable to contain curiosity, whispered loudly, "What's going to happen?" The audience shares the same question. Everyone is on the edge, craving the next move. Steven didn't rush. Instead, he assessed, scanned, and then executed the perfect maneuver. The sheriff attempted a step forward, but Steven's stance blocked him effortlessly. One subtle movement, and the sheriff's balance faltered. It wasn't violence for spectacle, it was precision, a display of control, mastery, and consequence. The room held its collective breath as Steven's eyes bore into the sheriff's. A silent message passed: respect boundaries. Respect life. Abuse of power has repercussions. The sheriff's face drained of color. His arrogance had evaporated, replaced by realization and fear. Then came the engagement moment. Steven paused, looked directly at the camera, the audience's perspective, and asked, "What would you do if someone you love was threatened like this? Would you act or stay silent?" The question lands like a punch, pulling viewers in emotionally, forcing them to reflect while staying glued to the screen. The sheriff, now trembling, finally backed away, mumbling apologies. Patrons exhaled collectively, tension breaking like a snapped rope. Mrs. Robinson's eyes glistened with relief, yet admiration for the man who had defended her without unnecessary aggression. Steven Seagal, calm as ever, adjusted his stance, ensuring the sheriff wouldn't attempt another foolish move. His presence alone had restored order. The audience is left with adrenaline, awe, and curiosity, wanting to know what happens next, how justice will fully resolve, and whether the sheriff will face real consequences. The diner returned to its normal rhythm slowly. Coffee cups clinked, conversations resumed, but the energy had shifted irreversibly. Everyone knew they had witnessed something extraordinary, a real life lesson in courage, skill, and standing up for what's right. The scene closes on Steven's calm expression, a subtle nod to Mrs. Robinson, and a final look at the sheriff. The audience is left hanging on the edge, satisfied with the confrontation, yet desperate to see the aftermath. The diner had returned to a semblance of normalcy, but the air was still thick with the echoes of what had just occurred. Patrons were murmuring quietly, some still staring at Steven Seagal, who now stood near the counter, calm and composed, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet everyone could feel the weight of his presence, a man who commanded respect without a word of threat, whose mere stance could alter the behavior of the most arrogant. Mrs. Robinson sat back down in her booth, her hands still shaking slightly as she clutched her coffee cup. Relief mixed with awe. She couldn't believe what had just unfolded before her eyes. The sheriff, once a symbol of authority and menace, now seemed diminished, powerless under Steven's silent but unyielding dominance. She realized that true power wasn't in titles or badges, it was in the courage and skill to stand up for what's right. Jenny, the young waitress, wiped her hands on her apron, trying to regain composure. Her voice trembled slightly as she addressed a customer. Everything's fine now. But even she couldn't mask the exhilaration, the electric energy that lingered in the air. She had witnessed justice in action, and it was unlike anything she had ever seen before. Outside, the sheriff brooded, slouched against his patrol car. He knew the humiliation he faced was more than personal. It was public, witnessed by dozens in the diner, captured in countless eyes and memory. His authority had been shattered in a matter of moments. The audience watching the video can almost feel his panic, his desperate search for control that no longer existed. This is the moment that teaches the stark reality. Abusing power carries consequences, and sometimes those consequences arrive in the form of someone you never expected to encounter. Meanwhile, Steven Seagal's calmness remained unshaken. He didn't gloat, he didn't boast. He merely ensured Mrs. Robinson was safe, that order had returned. He was a guardian, a protector. His actions precise, measured, and deliberate. Every step, every move was calculated to prevent unnecessary harm while ensuring justice was felt. The patrons gradually resumed their meals, but conversation buzzed with the story of what had happened. Everyone had a different perspective, yet all shared a common sentiment. Witnessing courage and skill in the face of injustice is unforgettable. Some whispered admiration for Steven, others muttered criticism at the sheriff, and many simply sat in reflective silence, processing the shock of what had unfolded. As the sun began to set outside, casting long shadows across the diner's floor, the patrons slowly began to leave, each carrying their own version of the story. Some would recount it as a tale of courage. Others would describe it as a lesson in humility. But all would remember the figure of Steven Seagal, a man whose presence had turned fear into safety, arrogance into respect. Mrs. Robinson lingered a little longer, savoring the moment of security and gratitude. She finally spoke, voice trembling yet firm. "Thank you for everything." Steven simply nodded, his expression calm, almost serene. There was no need for words, the gratitude in her eyes said it all. The sheriff eventually walked back into the diner, attempting to salvage his dignity, but the atmosphere had shifted irreversibly. Patrons now viewed him through a lens of accountability, not authority. They had witnessed firsthand that actions speak louder than titles, and that real power comes from skill, courage, and morality, not a badge or uniform. For the audience, this aftermath serves a dual purpose. It allows them to reflect on the consequences of the sheriff's actions, and it also highlights the rare combination of skill and integrity that Steven Seagal brought into the scenario. By grounding the story in real human reactions, tension is transformed into lasting engagement. Viewers are not just passive watchers, they are emotionally invested, contemplating their own potential responses in similar situations. The diner lights dimmed slightly as evening settled, but the energy lingered. Conversations hummed, glances were exchanged, and the story of that day would be retold countless times. Everyone present had been touched by the lessons of courage, restraint, and justice, and the audience at home, watching this unfold, is equally drawn into that energy. This part of the story leaves viewers reflective yet satisfied, emotionally engaged, and eager to see what comes next, the resolution, the final consequences, and the ultimate takeaway from an unforgettable confrontation. If you were in Mrs. Robinson's place, would you confront the sheriff yourself or wait for someone like Steven to step in? Type your answer in the comments. The following morning, the news of the diner incident had spread like wildfire. Social media buzzed with videos and eyewitness accounts, showing Steven Seagal calmly handling the situation and the sheriff's stunned reaction. The story captured the attention of millions, triggering heated debates about authority, abuse of power, and the rare moments when courage and skill override fear. Inside the diner, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. Robinson was greeted with nods of respect from patrons and staff alike. The younger customers whispered about Steven's legendary calmness and precision. Even Jenny, the waitress, felt a newfound sense of pride in the place where she worked. She had been a witness to history, and it left a lasting impression on everyone present. Meanwhile, the sheriff faced mounting scrutiny. Internal investigations were launched, and statements from witnesses piled up. His actions, once considered untouchable, were now under the harsh light of accountability. It became clear that abuse of authority could no longer be ignored, and that consequences were inevitable, a reality reinforced by the undeniable presence of Steven Seagal in the diner that day. Steven, on the other hand, remained focused and composed. He did not seek attention, nor did he revel in the sheriff's humiliation. Instead, he ensured that Mrs. Robinson felt safe and supported, making certain that the situation would not escalate further. His actions spoke louder than any words, a quiet, commanding presence that reminded everyone of the power of discipline and moral courage. The diner gradually returned to normal, yet the events of that day lingered in the minds of all who had witnessed them. Conversations revolved around respect, accountability, and the importance of standing up to injustice. Patrons discussed what they would have done in the same situation, and a collective sense of reflection filled the air. Now comes a moment for audience engagement, a short question to provoke thought and interaction. Do you think the sheriff deserved punishment, or was Steven's intervention enough justice? Comment below with your opinion. This question encourages viewers to participate actively, creating a connection between the story on screen and their own sense of morality and judgment. As the sheriff faced the consequences of his actions, a sense of closure emerged. The diner staff, patrons, and community members realized that justice had been served, not through anger or retaliation, but through courage, skill, and moral authority. Steven Seagal's presence had been a catalyst, a reminder that integrity and courage can turn the tide, even in moments of extreme tension. The aftermath left everyone with a valuable lesson: titles and badges do not guarantee respect or moral authority. True respect is earned through actions, decisions, and the courage to stand for what is right. The sheriff's arrogance had been exposed, while Steven's calm and measured response had solidified his role as a protector and moral anchor in the story. The story reached viewers far beyond the diner itself. Online discussions, news segments, and social media debates ensured that the incident became more than a simple confrontation. It became a lesson in accountability, ethics, and courage. Steven Seagal's handling of the situation inspired many to reconsider what it truly means to act with integrity under pressure. For Mrs. Robinson, the experience was transformative. She no longer felt helpless in the face of authority. She understood that sometimes intervention comes in unexpected forms, but that courage and integrity always leave a lasting mark. The sheriff, now facing public scrutiny, had been humbled in a way that could not be ignored. The diner continued its operations, but the memory of that day remained vivid. Patrons shared stories with new customers, recounting the calm, controlled presence of Steven Seagal, and the lessons learned from the sheriff's arrogance. Every retelling reinforced the idea that courage and moral authority can prevail even in the most intimidating circumstances. By the end of the day, a sense of resolution had settled over the community. The immediate danger was gone, accountability had been established, and viewers were left reflecting on their own values and reactions in similar situations. As the sun set over the small town, the diner returned to its calm routine. Yet the events of that day were far from forgotten. Patrons, staff, and community members carried with them the memory of a moment that had tested courage, morality, and human decency. What had begun as a shocking act of abuse of power had evolved into a story about accountability, intervention, and the extraordinary impact one person can have in a critical moment. Steven Seagal's role in the incident became more than just a display of physical skill. It was a demonstration of moral authority. His actions were precise, controlled, and measured. He did not humiliate or escalate unnecessarily. Instead, he ensured safety, dignity, and justice prevailed. The sheriff, once perceived as untouchable, had been confronted with the consequences of arrogance and misuse of authority. This juxtaposition of character, integrity versus abuse of power, resonated deeply with those who witnessed the event and those who followed the story online. Mrs. Robinson, the elderly woman who had been wronged, now felt empowered. She realized that standing up to injustice does not always require confrontation. Sometimes, the right person appearing at the right moment can shift the entire balance. The incident had given her a renewed sense of agency and hope, reinforcing the idea that courage and moral responsibility are contagious. For the community, the story served as a reminder of the importance of accountability. The sheriff's behavior was no longer just a private failing, it became a public lesson. Conversations in the diner, on social media, and in local circles revolved around the consequences of arrogance and the value of integrity. People debated, reflected, and shared their own stories, drawing parallels between their lives and the dramatic events they had witnessed. The audience engagement element here is subtle but impactful. As viewers, they are encouraged to reflect on their own actions. If you were in the diner that day, how would you have reacted? Would you have intervened, stayed silent, or looked for help? Comment with your choice. This not only keeps them engaged but also personalizes the story, making it relatable and interactive. From a broader perspective, the incident emphasized that respect and authority are not automatically granted by titles or uniforms. True authority is earned through integrity, accountability, and the willingness to act morally in difficult situations. Steven Seagal's calm yet commanding presence had reminded everyone of this essential truth: courage, intelligence, and ethical action often speak louder than any badge or rank. The story also highlights the ripple effect of positive intervention. One individual acting with integrity can influence many, inspiring change, reflection, and dialogue. The sheriff's humiliation was a lesson in humility, but the real takeaway was the empowerment it brought to others. Witnesses, viewers, and even the sheriff himself were forced to confront uncomfortable truths about morality, respect, and the consequences of their choices. As the community moved forward, the diner remained a symbol of resilience and justice. It became a place where stories were shared, lessons were remembered, and the extraordinary courage of one man, Steven Seagal, was commemorated not for violence, but for the ethical courage he displayed. In conclusion, the incident at the diner was not just an isolated event. It was a powerful narrative about morality, courage, and accountability. It reminded viewers that every choice carries weight, that standing up for what is right matters, and that intervention, when done with intelligence and integrity, can have lasting impact. The story ends with a sense of reflection and empowerment, leaving the audience with a lasting lesson. True strength lies not just in physical ability, but in the courage to act rightly, even when no one else will. This final part ties the story together, provides closure, and ensures the audience walks away with both an emotional and moral takeaway, increasing engagement, reflection, and retention for your video.